welcome everyone. My name is Jen Rush, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Socialism 2010. I don't know if anyone else feels as strange as I do, being in these opulent surroundings discussing socialist politics. It's a little like the Tsarist Winter Palace. And hopefully one day, like the Russian workers, we will take over this and make it our own. And actually, as one step in that process, I want to let people know that workers with Unite HERE in Chicago, who work with the Palmer House, are in contract negotiations with hotels throughout downtown Chicago. If you would like to show your support for the workers, for their struggle, please wear one of their buttons that can be found at the registration area. Less than a month ago, Israel's barbaric raid on the Mavi Marmara and the Gaza Freedom Flotilla exposed for the entire world to see the barbarism of the Israeli state. And while it was horrific to watch, I don't think that any of us who follow the issue can say that it's completely surprising that they feel like they can get away with what was essentially cold-blooded murder in order to defend their murderous state. The fact that they're backed up by the United States and managed to go without criticism, I think, has given them confidence. There's emerged a movement in response to it that also shows that around the world there are people who are determined to break the siege on Gaza, to stand with the Palestinian people, and to oppose the genocide taking place by the Israeli state. Because as horrific as the attack on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla was, it pales in comparison to the barbarism that is unleashed on the people of Gaza every single day, especially since the horrific blockade was imposed in 2006. And it's a blockade and a siege that must end, and it's a struggle for Palestinian liberation that many people in this room share, and I think larger and larger numbers of people around the world are looking to. So we're very fortunate tonight to have a panel of activists and writers who can speak to us about the struggle that's going on. I'll introduce them in a moment, but first I just wanted to call in Todd Cretion. Maybe you can show the mic situation.
Just a very quick announcement, bringing greetings from the West Coast, but in relationship to what we're talking about here tonight. As we speak, there is an Israeli ship steaming towards the port of Oakland. The ILWU, activists within the union, pro-Palestinian activists in the Bay Area, the San Francisco and the Alameda Central Labor Councils have decided they are going to picket that ship, and we are pretty confident that it will not be unloaded. So we will know that ship is due in at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. People are committed to be out there. The last time activists went to picket a ship was when they were sending supplies to Iraq in 2003. The police showed up and attacked people with rubber bullets. We don't expect that this time because I think the response is going to be so overwhelming. But we will know on Sunday morning when we get up what the status of that ship is. So I just wanted to bring greetings from the West Coast and let people know that that's happening.
Before I introduce our first speaker, I did just want to announce that there was another speaker that was supposed to be here with us tonight, Ali Abu Nima, who's the founder of Electronic Intifada, which is a fantastic resource for anyone looking for actual analysis of events in the Middle East and in Palestine. He is also the author of a fantastic book called One Country, a bold proposal to end the Israeli-Palestinian impasse, which is available for sale in Haymarket. People should go and check it out. It's also at the back of the room. So we're very fortunate. Our first speaker tonight is Kevin Ovenden. I'm thinking from that response he doesn't need much of an introduction, but for those who don't know, he was the coordinator of Viva Palestina, it has organized 3 land convoys to Gaza to break the siege. Viva Palestina was also one of the sponsors of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and he was aboard the Mavi Marmara when it was attacked by the Israelis. And he will speak tonight about his experience in the struggle to break the siege on Gaza. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All changed utterly. So wrote the great poet William Butler Yeats after the British suppression of the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916. After Bloody Monday in the Eastern Mediterranean, we can complete that couplet. A new phase of struggle is born, but at a terrible, almost unbearable price. 9 of our brothers taken from us, scores more wounded with gunshots. Their blood now lapping on the shores of Gaza. But their blood was not shed in vain, because the tide has turned, and we must seize this tide to make a lasting change in Palestine, the Middle East, and around the world. We remember all of them. I remembered them on the Monday night, bound in an Israeli dungeon in the Negev desert, a place where any self-respecting friend of Palestine would be honoured to spend just 1 minute. I remembered the older man, 1 metre in front of me, shot through the leg. The younger man, slightly younger than me, 50 centimetres to the right of me, shot through the abdomen. I remembered the photographer holding a stills camera, shot through the forehead, the high-velocity bullets blowing away the back third of his skull, cradled by a friend of mine, Nicky Enchmarch, as the last few seconds of his life expired. All 3 of these shot from above. In all instances, not one Israeli commando in any immediate proximity. Completely unfeasible to claim that anyone was in fear of their life or in fear of violence when they rang out those shots which gunned down those men. The lies are falling apart thick and fast. The evidence is being accumulated. I could go through all of the testimony and the evidence, and it will be accumulated, not by the Israeli tribunal, the whitewashed tribunal that they've set up in Tel Aviv. There's only one thing you need to know about this tribunal. The bona fide for its impartiality is that Israel has invited onto it to take part a man called David Trimble, who is a representative of the unionist establishment in the north of Ireland, which itself is complicit in covering up the massacre of 14 unarmed civilians on the streets of Derry and covering it up for 38 years. There'll be no truth, of course, from this inquiry, and we want an independent inquiry, but we do not have to wait for an independent inquiry, because the bald and blood-soaked facts are very straightforward. On the one hand, 9 people dead. On the other, 3 or 4 roughed-up Israeli commandos. Now, as you say on this side of the Atlantic, go figure. And millions of people around the world have already gone and figured. And that's why Israel was on the back foot immediately that this massacre took place. But the enemy doesn't rest, and they're trying to get back onto the front foot. In particular, there is now a concerted effort to isolate, to denigrate, to calumniate against the government of Turkey, the people of Turkey, and the civil society organizations of Turkey, in particular, the courageous İHA, led by Bülent Yıldırım. And in these circumstances, we as an international movement cannot allow the Turkish front to be isolated. And that means that from Vermont to Lake Van, from California to Cairo, we must link arms together and all take a step forward into the front rank of this movement to propel it forward. This is what we must do now. We cannot allow the arguments that they're putting about, the propaganda, to gain currency. We need to refute them. We need to refute the slander that there is any affinity whatsoever between the mass, democratic, politically and civilly engaged but Islamically inspired organizations in Turkey and the nihilist sectarians of Osama bin Laden and of Al-Qaeda. We cannot allow any credence for that argument whatsoever. And we cannot allow the argument that the massacres on the Mavi Marmara were in any sense the responsibility of those of us who were aboard. That Israel, in some sense, was attacked. Attacked by Ibrahim Bilgin, a 61-year-old father of 6, who was a candidate for mayor in forthcoming elections in his hometown. Attacked by 38-year-old Cevdet Kılıçlar, a brilliant photographer and journalist, a father of 2. Attacked. I'm minded of what Malcolm might have made of this. Oh, you see, we didn't land on Israel. Israel landed on us. And it is because we collectively defied and resisted Israeli terror that this event has had such an impact. Because of that, and because of something even more important, it was an event which connected with processes that have already been underway for some time, reinforced those processes, and opened up new possibilities for the movement. The meaning of the massacre of the Mavi Marmara is that the miasma of defeat, which has settled, sedimented for far too long in the Middle East and on the minds of even many of us, is finally lifting, and through the clearing fog we can begin to see the steps that we can take forward to victory and to ultimate victory for the Palestinian cause and the wider cause. What are those processes? First, we know Israel's hard power. We experienced it firsthand, the lethal hard power. But I must say in the names of the families at the graveside of those who were buried on this Thursday and Friday after the massacre in Istanbul, we are not afraid. We're not afraid. We weren't afraid in Istanbul, and we're not afraid in this room tonight. And the reason we're not afraid is, despite all the firepower, the political capital, the stock of the State of Israel, has withered and wasted and is lower now than at any time since the inception of the Zionist entity 62 years ago. There was a time, some people in the audience are old enough to remember, where in many countries, even progressives, and in some countries, particularly progressives, saw the State of Israel as some kind of social democratic outpost facing a sea of hostile, barbarous Arabism, a Sweden on the Eastern Mediterranean. That visage has gone, and it's been replaced by the faces of Benjamin Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman, and my God, what ugly faces they are. What ugly faces they are. And the process has accelerated in the last 4 years. Israel's invasion of Lebanon 4 years ago resulted in military and political defeat. Its compensatory attack, murderous attack on the people of Gaza 18 months ago, resulted in political defeat and did not achieve its military objectives. Now we have a situation in the country I come from, in Britain, and in Germany, and in Italy, in Ireland, and in Australia, where many people who don't really care that much about the Middle East are asking the question, well, what's in it for us in this relationship with a state that will forge the passports of our citizens in order to carry out an extrajudicial execution, thereby putting at risk any British passport holder who travels to Dubai? We have a situation now where some people in the United States are asking, and we should encourage more to ask, what's in it for the citizens of the United States, for the White House's billions of dollars of subventions to be voted through every year by Congress to provide the very bullets, the 5 bullets that were fired into the head of Furkan Doğan, an American citizen? What's in it for people? What's in it for you? What's in it for the ordinary people in the United States? And because of this, the movement has been growing. The convoy movement over the last 18 months, the Viva Palestina convoys, bigger and more effective. The individual ships going to Gaza, leading to the flotilla of 6 ships which was so brutally attacked. The question which I'll address towards the end of the isolation of apartheid Israel in the way that apartheid South Africa was isolated through boycotts, divestment and sanctions. It's because this movement is growing that even in the Negev desert, isolated as we were, we could explain to those who were perhaps more fearful, don't worry, the truth will get out. We have friends. Some of them we know, many of them we don't, but they will take to the streets instantaneously. And you did. You took to the streets instantaneously. There's a third reason, and that is that the geopolitical plates in the Middle East that have locked in the oppression of the Palestinians for so long are beginning to shift. Put simply, perhaps too simply, but certainly quickly, you didn't have to be Henry Kissinger or Zbigniew Brzezinski to know in 2003 that if you knocked out Ba'athist Iraq, that the Islamic Republic of Iran would gain in prestige and influence in the region. That was obvious. But it was also predictable that other powers, or would-be powers, would seek to step into the regional vacuum that you created. And underlying all the contingent political events that are happening, that's what's happening with the state of Turkey and with sections of Turkish capitalism, attempting to redefine its role inside of the Middle East, not in complete opposition to the United States, but straining at the bonds of the embedded relationship between the Turkish state and the State of Israel, between the Turkish state through NATO and to the United States. It's a process which is not moving simply in one direction. In 2003, the Turkish Parliament voted in what was a pivotal moment not to allow the United States to use the 14 air bases in Turkey to muster an invasion of Iraq from the north. It helped to concentrate the minds of the MPs that there were hundreds of thousands of people protesting outside in the streets of Ankara. It's not that these state actors will deliver victory. But the actions of these states will create the fissures, and are creating the fissures, through which the struggle can emerge in order to win victories. This is the process which is taking place now. And therefore, to end, the movement is at a turning point. The question is not whether the siege of Gaza will be lifted, but how long it will take and how it will be lifted. How decisive this turning point is not completely in our hands, but a part of it is in our hands. This is the Sharpeville, the Soweto of the Palestine solidarity movement, not the Sharpeville and Soweto of the Palestinians. The Palestinians have seen more and more massive massacres every year since Dar Yassin, through Black September, through Sabra and Shatila, through to the atrocities against the people of Gaza, not of the Palestinians, but of the movement of us who stand with the Palestinians. And brothers and sisters, comrades, we must change ourselves. All movements need activists, but we cannot simply be a movement of activists. We must become a movement of people, of social forces, of the mass democratic forces, above all in the Middle East, which can transform the lives of the Palestinian people. This is the step. This is the step. And so people ask me whether there will be more flotillas and more convoys. There will be more flotillas and more convoys. Immediately after the month of Ramadan, around the 12th of September, a gigantic international convoy organised by Viva Palestina will leave from London, heading through Europe into the Near East, down to Aqaba, across the Sinai and up to the Rafah crossing. Simultaneously, a bigger, more representative of more countries flotilla will muster in the Mediterranean, travel port to port, and aim to be off the coast of Gaza at the same time as we are at the crossing at Rafah. Why must this continue? Because the direct challenge and the direct confrontation with Israel, and it must be said, with those states which are complicit in the siege on the Palestinian people. You see, Rafah is an Arab crossing. If Egypt opened the border to everything that Gaza needed, Israel could go whistle in the dark. The siege would be ended. So a combined pincer movement, and on that day, if not before, this siege will fall. This siege will directly be challenged and the siege will fall. And this can spur on the burgeoning movement to boycott Israel, divest, to sanction Israel, to create the climate of opinion in which no self-respecting person regards the apartheid state of Israel as any form of legitimate entity in the 21st century. This is what happened around South Africa. It created the circumstances in which a young shop worker, Mary Manning, in Dublin, could refuse to serve a customer because she wanted to buy South African produce. She was sacked. There was a strike. It became an international cause célèbre. There are Mary Mannings out there in this city, in Britain, in Ireland, and in other countries. We must create the circumstances in which they feel confident to act. And finally, this is the Sharpeville and the Soweto. Remember, the apartheid abomination could murder 69 people in Sharpeville. It could gun down Hector Peterson and hundreds of school students in Soweto. It could torture and execute our prince, Steve Biko. It could assassinate our lion, Chris Hani, but Nelson Mandela walked free. Apartheid did fall. This siege will be lifted. The apartheid wall will fall. To Gaza, to Gaza, through Gaza to a Palestine, free, sovereign, dignified.
After that, I think it would be appropriate to mention, I forgot to mention this earlier, that when Kevin came to New York to speak, to begin this speaking tour, there were a series of politicians, both Democrat and Republican, who tried to try to get his visa denied on the basis that we did not want the flotilla terrorists entering our country. I think you can see why they would be afraid to let him in. They are afraid because the Israeli propaganda machine can no longer roll like a tank without facing resistance. It is faced with the courage and conviction of people like Kevin, like people on the Freedom Flotilla, the people in this room, and the hundreds of thousands of people around the world who stand with the Palestinian people to resist. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who is Tariq Ali. He is a writer and activist. He is the author of a series of fictional novels called the Islam Quintet, the most recent of which is called The Book of Saladin. His most well-known book about the Middle East is The Clash of Fundamentalisms. Both those, as well as his many other books, are available for sale on the back and at Haymarket. Please welcome Tariq.
As Kevin said, people are now beginning to realize all over the world what the Israeli state is and what it is capable of. And it has taken a long time. And if you look at it, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon, on the say-so of the United States, Britain, and a number of European powers, the reaction, there were demonstrations, but the reaction was not as strong as it should have been. When they invaded Gaza and laid siege to Gaza, the reaction was much, much stronger. And for many people, the attack on Gaza and the siege of Gaza was one step too far. That went very deep because people could see what was going on. And I say people, I mean citizens. I don't mean governments, because the American government and the European Union government backed the wars on Lebanon and backed the siege of Gaza. In the case of Lebanon, the Israelis had said it would take them a week to wipe out Hezbollah. They couldn't do it. Take another week, said the American president. Take a few more days, said the Europeans. Still didn't happen. They couldn't do it. It was a setback. When Gaza was witnessed by people, there was a real wave of anger from below, and it was felt. But the governments didn't say anything. A few mealy-mouthed words, but nothing more than that. Apart from the Norwegian government, which criticized it because there had been a one-day strike in Norway by the Railway Workers' Union, and who had asked the rest of the country to stop doing everything at one particular time and think about what was happening in Gaza. And I am told by Norwegian friends that the whole country virtually came to a standstill as they thought about Gaza at that time. So with the attack on the flotilla, we went one step further, because everyone could see that this was illegal, that the Israelis had no right to do it, and it soon became very clear that it was not an accidental decision that was taken, just as the previous two decisions weren't accidental. They had been planned for some time, and we now know that Ehud Barak and Bibi Netanyahu had planned this thing together. Carefully planned it together. Whether they had given orders to kill, we don't know as yet, and we probably will never know. But once you plan to do this, and in my opinion they probably had, because the ship on which they concentrated their fire was the Turkish ship, to teach Turkey a lesson. And one of the reasons they want to teach Turkey a lesson is not simply because they were angry about this issue, but they knew that behind the scenes the Turks and the Turkish and Brazilian governments were trying to mediate between Iran and the United Nations Security Council without the permission of the United States and against its will, which they did. So the relations between Turkey and Israel really have been harmed. But, you know, I'm not very impressed when the Turkish government says it is no longer having military maneuvers with the Israeli army, because the question that comes up is, why the hell were you having these maneuvers in the first place? When Gaza took place, the assault on Gaza, the only two countries in the world which withdrew their ambassadors from Israel and made very angry speeches were the governments of Venezuela and Bolivia, many continents far away. Nothing to do with any religion or anything, just old-fashioned internationalism and solidarity with an oppressed people. And they did it, and they did it again. And even Lula this time on the flotilla attack spoke very sharp words on what is going on. So, as far as public opinion is concerned, there is a shift. And even in the United States, though it is not registered openly, AIPAC and people are extremely worried that all the opinion polls being carried out within the Jewish community in the United States suggest that between 40 and 45% of young people who are questioned say they don't care a damn about Israel. And that worries them. That worries them because if this is the case, then in a couple of generations' time, the support for this style of activity which AIPAC carries out in the United States, blackmail and buying up senators and congressmen, will probably come to an end. Can't go on forever. And it worries them. Because it is a fact that when Gaza was happening, 100% of the US Senate voted for it in its support, and virtually the whole of Congress. And that is an outrage. And it's appalling, because there were many dissenting voices, the government, not the governments of Europe, but within the parliaments of Europe, and even within the European Parliament. There were dissenting voices saying that this is wrong. So where do we go now? The plans which they had of pushing through in Palestine essentially a fake two-state solution, because the only meaningful two-state solution would be a solution where they withdrew to their 67 frontiers. That wouldn't be a just solution, but it would be a meaningful solution. That they're not going to do. It's obvious. Everyone knows that. They're not going to pull back to the 67 frontiers. They're not going to share Jerusalem, as they promised. It's not going to happen. So all talk of a two-state solution, in my opinion, is meaningless today. It will essentially mean 3 or 4 Israeli protectorates, not even united or linked together, permanently overlooked by the Israeli army, and essentially very dependent on Israel, like the so-called Palestinian Authority is. It is not an authority. It doesn't have any of its own authority. It is totally dependent on Israel. That's the reality. And what the Israelis and the United States succeeded in doing, which they had been dreaming about for years, was to split the Palestinian movement when they unleashed parts of the PLO apparatus on the Hamas regime in Gaza, which Dahlan did. And during the Gaza siege, they didn't permit demonstrations in the areas controlled by the PLO. They were repressed. That's a fact. And we have to bear all this in mind to know the scale of the problem that confronts us. Now, the attack on the flotilla and the siege of Gaza did unite Palestinians from below, not at the top. Did unite Palestinians from below, but the division of the Palestinian national movement has been a big blow. Let's not pretend it hasn't. So the obstacles are numerous, but the flotilla attack for the first time divided Europe, or large parts of Europe, and the United States, since politician after politician, starting in Sweden, then which withdrew its ambassador, then Norway, then the British conservative Prime Minister said that the siege of Gaza should end. Even the Germans, who have been blackmailed into silence, even the German government for the first time said it could not support the attack on the flotilla. This was one step too far. And the German press, for once, was uniformly critical. I don't say it wasn't violently critical or sharply critical like parts of the British press were, but it was critical. So there is a shift. And without going over the top, we have to understand that this shift in public opinion means that the possibility of organizing a campaign, as the previous speaker said, on taking it to a higher level, the campaign for boycott, divestment and sanctions, is a very real possibility now, because there will be many, many people not remotely sympathetic to the left who will be sympathetic to such a campaign because of what they have seen and witnessed with their own eyes recently. So this is a time to give that campaign a boost. And I say to you again, because I often say to audiences in the States that you have a heavy responsibility. You are citizens in an imperial country. And this is a country which could, if it wanted to, the situation, they say the problem in the Middle East is two intractable sides. Nonsense. Because the old argument that the Israelis used to use in the 50s and 60s, we'll be wiped out, we'll be driven into the sea, and some stupid Arab politicians actually said that, but no one says that now. And even if someone said it, It's the notion that anyone can drive the Israeli army, the 6th largest in the world, and a nuclear power anywhere is just beyond belief. It's grotesque. So the notion that Israel is now threatened, the notion that Israel is now a threatened country is nonsense. It is not based on any reality whatsoever. It is Israel that threatens. It is Israel that blackmails. It is Israel that refuses to allow the Palestinian people any right of national self-determination at all. And given this, we then have to say the Palestinians have tried everything. They have made many mistakes as well, which one shouldn't forget or cover up. But they have tried anything. They have been, the PLO in particular, has been on its knees, desperate for crumbs in the Oslo Accords. Even those crumbs they weren't given. So there is now, apart from our task is to wage a campaign, a peaceful campaign, the BDS campaign abroad, that will genuinely be helpful. Have no doubt about it. But as far as the Palestinians are concerned, in my opinion, there is only one solution now in Palestine, and that is a one-state solution. And that is a solution which is in the interests of the Jewish inhabitants of that area, the Muslim inhabitants of that area, the Christian inhabitants of that region, all the minorities. And it's a position which those of us who are socialists and internationalists have always supported. We do not want ethnic states. We want a unified Israel-Palestine with the same rights for everyone, and that, when that happens, because I think it will happen, if not in 10 years' time, in 50 years' time, there is no other solution. And when that happens, it could transform once again prospects for the Middle East as a whole. Thanks.
The prelude to Israel's most recent assault on Gaza, the most recent stage of its assault, was also its invasion of Lebanon, where they were driven out by a mass popular-based resistance. Tonight we're very fortunate to have Gilbert Achcar, who is a writer from who is a Lebanese writer who is now teaching in London. He is the author of several important books on the Middle East. I will just highlight them. One is The Clash of Barbarisms, The Making of the New World Disorder, Eastern Cauldron, Islam, Afghanistan, Palestine, and Iraq in a Marxist Mirror, and his most recent book, The Arabs and the Holocaust, The Arab-Israeli War of Narratives, which he's speaking on this weekend. Please welcome Gilbert.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here with you, and I thank the ISO for this invitation and giving me this opportunity. We all agree here on this platform on the fact that, well, let me put it that way, Israel is beginning to lose the battle for public opinion. And this is a very important change that is happening. It has started happening over the last few months and increased recently with the recent aggression over the Freedom Flotilla. Now, what is striking is that Israel is beginning to lose this battle at a time when, as Tariq just mentioned, the Palestinian scene is certainly not attractive. I mean, image of that the Palestinians are presenting to the rest of the world is really a very bad one. This is really a low point from the point of view of the ability of the Palestinian movement to attract sympathy through its struggle and the forms of its struggle. If you compare that to the time of the first Intifada, especially at its peak in 1988, the difference is huge. So the reason why Israel is beginning to lose this battle for the world, more specifically the Western, actually, public opinion, is related to Israel itself, of course. It's Israel itself and the increasing, or at least increasingly obvious, cruelty of its behavior, the fact that Israel is going more and more beyond what is acceptable to dominant world hypocrisy. And that's the problem. That's the fact that is existing. Now, if you say that, you'll usually have people trying to outsmart you or outbid you and explain that, well, they were not better before. And, well, let me put it that way. They were not better, but they are getting worse. And this is actually, one could say, genetic in the state of Israel, in the very constitution of the state of Israel as a settler colonial state based on the forced expulsion of the native population. Such a state could not but develop into a racist, militarist kind, expansionist kind of state. And that was obvious in the nature of the Zionist project from the start. Let me just read a little quote from a famous text of 1923 by Vladimir Jabotinsky, the representative of the far right wing of the Zionist movement, the wing that the other wings, the so-called laborites, would qualify or describe as fascists. And that's what he had to say in 1923. Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. This colonization can therefore continue and develop only under the protection of an iron wall which the native population cannot break through. This is in toto our policy towards the Arabs. To formulate it in any other way would only be hypocrisy. Now, his competitors, of course, would say that he wasn't. The problem was not that he was less hypocritical, but he was less astute and was just wanting to say things that they preferred not to say openly. That's the only point. But the fact is that the very nature of the Zionist movement, the very nature of the Zionist project, the statist Zionist project, included this inexorable, this inevitable slide, drift toward the right more and more, and this is exactly what we see in the history of the Israeli state. After the first 2 decades, and that was only over 2 decades when the state could claim, or have an image of, some kind of socialist kibbutz. I mean, the idea of the kibbutz, for instance, Kevin was mentioning Sweden. Well, this stopped actually after 2 decades of the state of Israel. And this stopped when Israel continued its expansion over Palestinian territory by invading the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. And that's the time when, for instance, the kibbutz moved from being, kind of, the mind of people, a socialist project, into being what it has actually always been from the start, although it could have a combined character, but a military settler colonial outpost. And that's exactly what the kibbutz built on the West Bank were very clearly in the eyes of everybody. And of course, the 1967, with the occupation of the other part of Palestine, from which the native population this time did not move, the majority of them state there, created an occupational situation which increased the dynamics, this shift to the right, to the far right of the Israeli state. And, well, indeed, 10 years later, 1977, the Likud, that is the heirs of Jabotinsky, the fascist that I just quoted, arrived to power. That was in 1977. And they went on, they carried the things further. 1982, the war, the invasion of my country, of Lebanon, was also a landmark in the shift in the image of Israel, the real beginning of this evolution that is reaching now a point, a really qualitative turn with the recent events. And so you had the occupation of Lebanon for 18 years Lebanon, from where the Israeli army only went out because of the resistance, the armed resistance waged by the Lebanese people. Within this time frame, you had, this historical evolution, you had a very short interregnum, you can say, in Oslo, or at least this was the moment where you had some illusions about a possible, peaceful stance or new peaceful stance by the Israeli state. But, very, very quickly, any kind of illusions dissipated. It was quite clear, I should say, from the start, from the real project behind Oslo from the Israeli point of view, and the fact that actually the wall, we mentioned the Iron Wall, Jabotinsky, but there was a wall that has been built, it is being built, the wall of apartheid, the wall of separation in the West Bank. And this started, they started building it in 1994, immediately after the signature of Oslo, and that was Rabin's government, actually, who started that. And, of course, the interregnum of Oslo was exploited to double the colonization of the West Bank compared to the whole period between 1967 and the signature of the Oslo Agreement. And then in 2001, well, after Oslo failed and in 2000 the second Intifada started, we saw the election of Ariel Sharon, who was until then considered to be the right wing, the far right of the far right, the most extreme politician within the Likud. And he arrived to power in 2001 at the same time when George W. Bush, and you had the two most reactionary administrations in both countries converging at the same time, and that was a terrible convergence with the twin aggressions over the region. The region has really paid a very, very dear price for that. And, well, you know the rest of the story, reoccupation of those parts of the West Bank where the Israeli army had, that the Israeli army had evacuated, new massacres, and the wall being built, all, during this time, and carried on building with an Ariel Sharon who believed that even Oslo was too much of a concession, and who against even the framework of Oslo, and only believing in Israel deciding unilaterally which areas it would evacuate, a minority of the territories occupied in 1967. And then, well, you had 2006, the very violent aggression on Lebanon, the 33-day war. Well, indeed, that was a failure for the Israeli army, but of course the cost for Lebanon was absolutely huge, because this was the most cruel, in terms of intensity, the most cruel war of all Israeli wars until then. Even the 92 invasion was not that, we didn't see that type of concentration of violence and the, flattening out whole areas of the country that, as we saw in 2006. And that's the year also when Gaza was already attacked in the summer of 2006, and before Israel starts in 2007, the blockade of Gaza, which is a totally, it's a real strangulation of Gaza, And this is a blockade which has absolutely terrible consequences, all the more that Israel waged at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, for 3 weeks, this very brutal assault on Gaza, which destroyed over 15% of every building in the Gaza Strip, destroyed industry, destroyed infrastructure, destroyed water facilities, electricity, everything, and with a blockade preventing the Palestinians from rebuilding. They weren't allowed to import any material for that, and preventing the Gazan from exporting. So therefore, real strangulation, the result of which has been that the number of Gazans, according to the United Nations, that live in what is described as abject poverty, that is in total need of help, is 300,000 people out of a population of 1,500,000. That is 1/5 of the Gazans are in abject poverty due to the Israeli blockade. And well, this is the situation we are facing. And what's the outcome of all that? Well, the outcome of all that, I'm continuing my sketch of Israeli political evolution. What you get now is, again, the most reactionary, breaking a new record after Sharon, the most reactionary government in the history of Israel. The founding party of the Israeli state, the so-called Labour Party, is now number 4 in the Israeli Knesset. Number 1 and 2 are 2 fractions of the Likud, that is the fascist, the wing that used to be called fascist. The number 1 and 2 groups in the Knesset are wings of the fascist, and number 3 is an openly racist organization, the head of which is foreign minister of the State of Israel. This is a total shame. This is a total scandal. And this drift was, as I said from the start, something that was built in the very constitution of that state and the way it evolved historically. Now, due to the actions, the cruelty, the brutality that the state is more and more displaying, there are less and less people to defend the behavior of the Israeli state. We are seeing more and more of the traditional friends of Israel distancing themselves. Even, Judge Goldstone, a devout Jew and Zionist, very obviously, could not but, and with some intellectual honesty, criticize the crimes against humanity, to name them by their real name, committed by Israel in Gaza. And you saw the kind of treatment that he was exposed to. That's absolutely awful. And so what are left are only at the last quarter of unconditional people, supporters of Israel, the likes of Dershowitz or AIPAC. And that's it. And more people are shifting away from that. And we should point to the fact that the Freedom Flotilla, although at a huge cost, as Kevin pointed to, is the first real and major victory realized by the Solidarity movement. And until then, there was a sense of impotence in the Solidarity movement. There was a sense of impotence faced with the reality of what is going on there. The idea that, well, whatever we do, this will be just symbolic, but will not lead to anything. But with this event, there has been a real first victory, and indeed we can carry on, and I should say we should really consider that only as a beginning and carry on the fight. Thank you very much.
So with that, I'd like to introduce our final speaker. As someone mentioned, Egypt is another key ally of the United States in the Middle East and is complicit, really, in the choking of the Gaza Strip by closing off of the border. But this position of the Mubarak regime is very unpopular in Egypt and only fuels the anger and desire to fight not only Israel's occupation in the Middle East, but also the dictatorship of the Mubarak regime itself. We're very fortunate tonight to have Ahmed Shawki, who is an Egyptian activist and socialist. He is also the author of
I just have to accustom myself to the glare. The theme of tonight, or tonight's discussion, which I think is perfectly appropriate and the right theme, is how significant a change there has been, and yet more significant changes to come. And I want to develop a few points of that, of that view of what is going on. I have to also take a little pleasure, not only in the fact that Kevin managed to make it into the country, but that we have a panel that in the world of today's media, dominant here, would be a very peculiar panel to describe. Its composition alone should tell you something about its point of view, and its clearly extremist connections. We have, after all, someone who sailed in a ship towards Israel with humanitarian supplies, who also is Iranian, half Iranian. Second speaker, originally from Pakistan. Third, from Lebanon, and to top it off, an Arab Egyptian. This is clearly a panel which cannot be trusted, which has no facts or knowledge about the area. And while I start really as it managed to get a certain cheap joke across, it's not the reason the joke works, however poorly I delivered it, is that we all know that the reality in this country has gone towards a media that characterizes the Arab states, third world people from Muslim countries, Arabs, as one set of people who are to be suspected, stopped at borders, harassed, don't fly while Arab, don't speak while Arab, don't go to Arizona while Arab or Muslim. And I think that an introduction has to say that we have to not only honor those who died, but those who participated in the Gaza flotilla, but above all, to also acknowledge and applaud the struggle of the Palestinian people for Palestine since the Nakba of 1948. I go back to 1948 because we have talked about a new situation. This is not a new struggle. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge those who came before us, and that it's not a new struggle, but it has arrived at a new stage. For several reasons I will try to argue, not least amongst which, if anybody has been to a pro-Palestine demonstration here in this country, a new generation of Palestinians who were raised here and who have very strong feelings about the question of Palestine, and that is a feature that is internationally a reality in the Palestinian diaspora. But it's a new situation because, as several speakers, the speakers before me said, in part, what has happened to Palestine and Palestinians is now front page news and is known and absorbed by millions of people internationally. Perhaps least of all in the US, that is in terms of the media and the attention. But around the world, there has been a transformation of the view of the struggle for Palestine, which we should be aware. For those who remember the words of Golda Meir, there are no Palestinian people, or Palestine was an empty land and we created Israel in an empty land, or all of the talk about the attempt to rub out of history the Palestinians, that is not only no longer the case, but it is also the case that the idea of Israel as the sweet democracy in the Middle East has been demolished. Even supporters of the State of Israel, and I'll quote the paper of record here, as it's called, the paper that fits all the news. Sorry. The paper that prints all the news that's fit to print, whatever, the New York Times, writes about the flotilla, and I'll just quote their editorial. Mr. Obama, on Tuesday, that is the day after the attack, President Obama expressed his deep regret. I shouldn't be pictured. His deep regret, okay, over the flotilla incident. He is doing Israel no favors with such a tepid response. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has shown time and time again he prefers bullying and confrontation over diplomacy. Washington needs to make clear to him just how dangerous and counterproductive that approach is. Mr. Obama needs to state clearly that the Israeli attack was unacceptable and back an impartial international investigation. You know, the kind of thing that the American administration ran to do. You have to ask yourself what is going on when the New York Times, which does not generally editorialize anything against you, what does that indicate? I don't want to make too much of the quote. What does that indicate? Or what does the comment by a Mossad, the head of Mossad, a few days after the attack on the flotilla, says the U.S. used to see Israel as an asset. It now sees us as a deficit. What is that discussion all about? I think two things have come together in a way that opens up a completely new phase. First, the decision by the American empire, by American imperialism, to adopt a policy, the war on terror and the war of the preemptive war against enemy states in the attempt to dominate the world, and to have at its linchpin in the Middle East a country which requires, as previous speakers have stated, the expulsion of the native population from their land as a condition of its very existence. Not only enshrined in the structure of the state and the constitution of the state, but the means for the continued existence of Israel requires the continued expulsion of Palestinians. The two-state solution that was proposed and floated in the early 1990s, beginning with the Oslo Accords in 1992, was anything but a two-state solution. It was a one-state solution, except a one exclusivist state solution. And the carving up of Palestinian lands, the carving up of all of the Palestinian territories, and the withdrawal from Gaza was not the beginning of independence, but the attempt to create the conditions in which further containment and further violence could be conducted against the Israeli population. I remember attending a very, very important meeting that was held in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, with Ali Abu Nima of Electronic Intifada, Professor Mersheimer, and Norman Finkelstein, which was packed out, and in which one of the speakers, I apologize, I don't remember which one, quoted Arnon Sofer, a geostrategist from the University of Haifa, who is head of research for the IDF's, that is the Israeli Defense Forces, National Defense College. And here is the policy summarized by the head of the IDF's National Defense College. He gets a question. In our previous interview, you made many assertions about what could and should be expected to happen following the disengagement from Gaza. You claim now that everything has played out that way, the way you said it would. Sofer. Yes. I said the pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we will have to kill, and kill. End quote. He continues. That statement caused a huge stir at the time. And it's amazing to see how many dozens of angry, ignorant responses I continue to receive from leftists in Israel and anti-Semites abroad. I repeat, Israeli policy will have to be, we will have to kill, kill, kill. Yes? And then you go to the anti-Semites and the crazy leftists from Israel who took my words out of context. To be fair, I have to finish the quote. I didn't recommend that we kill Palestinians. I said we'll have to kill them. I didn't recommend that we kill Palestinians. I said we have to kill them. Now, there is a policy involved here. There is a policy involved here, which is that the condition of our survival as an exclusivist Jewish state requires the subjugation and the separation of the Palestinian population, which, unlike South Africa, is not a population at this moment that Israel is dependent on for labor. And that the policy of those who run the state of Israel is containment and further expulsion. That policy led to the onslaught on Gaza, with obviously the green light from the President-elect Obama, who said nothing about the assault on Gaza while it took place, and was inaugurated into office a day or two after it had ended. But U.S. policy in the region has not changed. There has been a cosmetic change, a change from Bush to Obama. U.S. policy in the region has not fundamentally changed, and it cannot maintain that kind of policy will produce the kind of situation that the United States finds itself in now. Because it's not only what Israel does, it's also a change in the whole relations in the region, including Turkey, which Kevin just said a few things about the Turkey. Remember, this is the ally of yesterday. This is the ally of yesterday, but who, for United States policy to maintain its supremacy in the region militarily and economically, it has now found itself in a situation of conflict. And I think that that situation will continue to produce contradictions and also expose the fault lines around which a movement will continue to emerge and can be built. But we can't stop there, and I want to just say one word, or a few words, about the one group of states that's absent, largely been absent in the discussion, and that is the Arab states. I think, actually it hasn't been absent. A couple of people mentioned, Gilbert mentioned the crossing. During the assault on Gaza, I was visiting family in Cairo, and you had the following headlines. Assault on Gaza, with pictures and details of what was going on. And below, Mubarak closes border. That is, at the time precisely of need, the Egyptian state steps in to close off the border. I haven't got time to develop it, but you have the state of Israel as a settler state in the region, but you have to say, why does the United States need a client state or a settler state? All the oil is elsewhere, and all the riches, well, that's the point. You need a settler state in order to maintain the relations in the regimes around Israel and maintain the flow of oil profits and geostrategic interests and so on and so forth. And the second biggest recipient, as people know, of U.S. aid after Israel is the state of Egypt. And I think that we will find a situation in which within the Arab countries there will be a renewed sympathy and effort around Palestinian struggle. There's a long history of that through the 1960s and early 1970s. The sentiment is palpable in terms of the sympathy for Palestine in the Arab countries, which is not at all reflected obviously from those governments. In 1976, Soweto occurred, the shooting of unarmed students in the township of Soweto. The term Amandla, power, became popularized and became the slogan of a new movement. The slogan of today's movement, I believe, will be BDS. It's not as catchy as Amandla, but something else will emerge. And I think that if we take anything from the events of the last week, it is to commit ourselves to all the efforts that aid and move the struggle against the apartheid state of Israel forward, to redouble our efforts, and to build a strong and united BDS campaign. And if the attack on the flotilla has helped that process, then I think we should take full advantage of it and continue the support of future flotillas to Palestine.
Thank you for coming. Stick around and enjoy the rest of the conference.